Mrs. Harlow patched up. With Mrs. Harlow patched up, the group had fallen silent and turned to the scene around them. The sky was orange in places where fires were burning in the city. The smoke and dust hung like a curtain. Other strangers were shadows in the street, alternating between rushing to this or that task or standing in clusters to stare in disbelief at the rubble. Across the street, a girl, about Allie's age, sat on her stoop with her leashed puppy cowering between her legs. She'd started lighting a row of candles beside her when someone called from a few houses down and told her to put them out in case of a gas leak. So she sat wide-eyed in the dark instead and stared at the rubble. What happened? Claire wondered aloud. Gas line, terrorist attack, aliens? John shrugged. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of terrorist attack. Max scratched at the scruff of his neck. State approved or the other kind? Said Mrs. Harlow. Possible retaliation for getting the mayor to step down? Said Claire. Probably someone taking advantage of the chaos. Guarantee we won't know tonight, though, said John. Allie heard a vibration and got excited that maybe it was her phone before Claire's lit up in her hand. Oh, thank God, Claire gasped, and then immediately looked like she wished she hadn't. It's Charlie. He's still at the airport, Allie nodded. There were so many things wrong with feeling jealous of Claire. Anybody know what time it is? Allie said, hoisting Sasha's bag onto her back. We should check the other houses, right? See if there's anyone still trapped. Going on midnight, Claire said. John and Mac nodded. Well, let's go. She needed to stay busy. It meant getting closer to the wreckage, but maybe it wouldn't take so long. Sasha would call her. Maybe it would take so long. Sasha would call her. Maybe. I'll stay with Mrs. Harlow. See if I can get in touch with Charlie, said Claire. Mrs. Harlow rolled her eyes. Allie handed them a couple of blue masks and a bottle of water for want of something more helpful to do. My sister's name is Sasha. If you see her, I know, honey, Mrs. Harlow nodded. I know. Allie waited at the bottom of the stairs at each house as John and Mac stopped, knocked, and called out. That's what most of the street was now. The ground was covered in shattered glass from busted windows and crunched between Allie's feet as she shifted her weight impatiently. She checked her phone whenever she felt an hour had passed and tried calling Sasha or waving it around for a signal so that she could get any delayed text messages. Just once she wanted to dial and hear the ringtone nearby. Sasha was obsessed with this song from the vintage Tom and Jerry episode, some country mouse yodeling. Allie would give anything to hear that stupid song just now. So far they'd gotten 5 people and 2 terrified dogs out of the slanting buildings. They'd borrowed the ladder atop some electrician's van to get an elderly man and his small, ugly, adorable dog from a second-story apartment over a coffee shop and a used bookstore. The worst injury between them was a broken arm, which Allie used the handbook to splint, but nothing that needed to be iced was getting iced, and nothing that needed stitching was going to be stitched tonight. The coughing was becoming more prevalent the closer they got to the wreckage. The dust burned her eyes, and she wished for goggles to somehow appear in the bag she now knew every inch of. She started handing out masks to bystanders while she waited for Mac and John and whoever else was to present her with someone who needed bandaging. A couple of people in beige blend military uniforms plucked at scabs of concrete from the pile of collapsed buildings, pausing intermittently to yell, "Trapped! Call out!" Allie waited with them, listening hard for sounds that weren't the ringing or smothered vibrating of buried cell phones. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear Sasha's voice. The thought made it even harder to breathe. No one called out. They went back to digging. "You're not getting in here." Allie's attention snapped back to a house with an orange door before her, where John and Mac were trying to coax someone out through the window. "Sir, we're here to help," Max tried. "What, y'all come to fix with sledgehammers? This isn't the purge," an incredulous voice scoffed from inside. "I will not be looted today. No, sirs." The men exchanged confused, frustrated expressions. "We just want to get you looked at and see if you need any medical attention, that's all," said John. "Sasha Carmichael out there?" said the voice. They turned to look at Allie, who gulped and trudged her way up the stairs. "No," she called. "I'm her sister, though. My name is Allie. Well, Allie. My name is Mr. Curtis Brown. Do you know these men? The voice said loudly. She thought for a moment. Until a couple of hours ago, no, she didn't know them. She didn't much know them now. They could have once been people who robbed houses using sledgehammers, but it hadn't occurred to her. She did feel confident enough to say now, though, that they weren't going to purge this man. Yes, we've been going door to door to get people out. Sometimes we patch them up. See, I have Sasha's manual and everything. She thrust the little reflective book in front of the window, bracing for him to shoot at it with a gun. It hadn't occurred to her for a moment earlier he might have. She snatched the book back quickly. Mr. Brown didn't say anything. Even if you're not hurt, Mr. Brown, we still want to come inside, Allie tried. The buildings aren't safe on this block. The blast knocked a bunch of stuff loose, and we don't want it to crush anybody. There was nothing now, no response from inside for full seconds. The three of them stood on the porch and looked at each other before Allie swallowed the knot in her throat and leaned across the broad banister to peer inside the window with her flashlight. Mr. Brown, it's Allie. I just want to look at you. If you're okay, we'll leave you alone. The light traveled across the room, visibility obscured by the increasing presence of dust. Items had been tossed from shelves and tabletops, and some of the floor was strewn with things that had broken. Mr. Brown, if this was him, was a thin, brown, middle-aged man seated dazed on the floor in the far corner with blood glazing his palms. Mr. Brown, are you bleeding? She asked him. Yeah, he replied. Glass is all in 'em. His speech seemed tired, forced. He blinked hard and his eyes listed over in her direction. Something was wrong. Allie felt panic rising in her chest. He could be concussed. He could die, and she was the only thing resembling medical help for blocks. Can you come to the window? The guys will pull you out and we can look at you. She tried. Mr. Brown shook his head and appeared to drift off to sleep. She turned to Mac and John. You have to get him out of here now. I'd go in, but I can't carry him back out. Mac tested the door to see if it would budge without greater violence, but John ended up having to slam the hammer through its locks repeatedly. When he forced the door open, a groaning, splintering sound rang out and seemed to resonate down the block. Strangers with assumed authority shouted, Stand back and move! Allie held her breath and covered her ears, waiting to scream forever as the row homes went down like dominoes, with Mr. Brown being crushed first. But nothing collapsed. The ground barely shook. John and Mac decided with a look to rush in and grab Mr. Brown and then rush back out. They carried him out between them and placed him on the sidewalk, where Allie took a long time examining him to figure out what she needed to look up in the manual. His hands were badly cut, with nauseatingly large slivers of glass embedded in both of them. That was the easy part. His pupils were also slow to respond to her flashlight, and while he could hear and communicate, he was bleeding from both his ears. Far as she knew, she only had the resources to help his hands. She gave him some water and cleaned his hands, removing only what she thought might not make him bleed too much. She wasn't sure how much he had to spare and didn't want him going into shock. She wrapped his hands as best she could and propped him against a large flower pot that was mostly just dirt.